Carl Jung reveals why your mind secretly craves what destroys you. There's something terrifying and strangely magnetic about the things we know are bad for us. We touch them, we turn to them again and again as if they hold some secret we haven't yet unlocked. We tell ourselves we're done. We swear we've learned. And yet, one day later, 1 week later, 1 year later, we're back. Not always with the same person. Not always with the same addiction. But always with the same pattern. Have you ever asked yourself, why does part of me seem to want exactly the thing that hurts me the most? That question isn't just self-help. It's philosophy. It's psychology. And Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to answer it. Jung believed that the mind wasn't a single voice. It was a chaotic orchestra of competing forces, some conscious, some unconscious, many in direct contradiction with each other. He described the human psyche as a battlefield where light and shadow collide. And most of us, he said, live in ignorance of half that battlefield. We only listen to the conscious mind, the part that says, I want to be happy, I want to grow, I want to heal. But beneath that surface lies another force, the unconscious, filled with repressed fears, unprocessed pain, forgotten traumas, and unmet desires. And here's where it gets terrifying. That unconscious mind isn't passive. It has its own logic, its own goals, its own gravitational pull. And sometimes, what's buried in your unconscious wants what will destroy you.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But why? Why would any part of us crave destruction? Jung's answer was brutal, elegant, and deeply human. Because destruction is the only path some part of you knows to transformation. Think about it. If you've spent years building an identity around being the strong one, the smart one, the successful one, then failure, heartbreak, collapse, they feel like death. But to the unconscious, they might be the only door to freedom. The only way to shatter the illusion. The only way to finally let go of the false self you've spent your life constructing. So the unconscious will pull you quietly, invisibly toward the edge. Not because it hates you, but because it's trying to wake you up. This is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. How many times have you looked back on a decision, a relationship, a job, a moment of sabotage and thought, why did I do that? I knew better. You did know better. But not all of you agreed. And this is the core of Jung's insight. Your mind is not one thing. It is many. And unless you confront the parts of yourself that you've exiled, the parts that are angry, wounded, ashamed, addicted, lonely, they will keep pulling you back into the same cycles again and again. Not because you're broken, but because you haven't integrated. Integration is the key. Jung didn't believe in destroying the shadow. He believed in befriending it. In facing the parts of yourself you're most ashamed of and asking, what are you trying to protect? What are you trying to say? That's a radical idea, because our culture teaches us to suppress what's dark, to fix what's broken, to overcome what's messy, but Jung flips it. He says, go into the mess, go into the fear, go into the thing you're most afraid to feel, because that's where your wholeness is hiding. Let me ask you something that might hit hard. What part of you are you pretending doesn't exist? The angry one, the jealous one, the one who wants to burn it all down? The one who feels unworthy even when everything looks perfect on the outside? That part doesn't go away just because you ignore it. In fact, the more you suppress it, the more power it gains. That's the paradox. The more we try to be only good, only kind, only strong, the more our shadow grows in silence. And sometimes it breaks through in the most destructive ways. A sudden breakdown, a betrayal, an addiction relapse. An inexplicable decision that ruins everything. And we say, I don't know what came over me. But Jung would say, something within you was trying to speak, and you refused to listen. And so it chose chaos. This is what makes Jung's work so dangerous and so liberating. It forces us to stop pretending, to stop blaming everything on the outside. Yes, society shapes us, trauma wounds us. But at some point we have to ask, what am I doing to myself, and why? Not from a place of guilt, but from a place of curiosity. The mind is not your enemy. Even the parts that sabotage you are trying to survive, to express, to free themselves from the prison of repression. The question is, will you face them? Will you listen before they destroy something precious? Because here's the ultimate twist. Until you face what destroys you, you will keep confusing pain for passion. You will chase chaos and call it love. You will build identities that secretly crave collapse, and you'll never understand why. But once you turn inward, once you look into the shadow and say, I see you, everything begins to change. Not easily, not overnight, but deeply, permanently. You stop being a victim of your mind. You become its master. You stop craving what destroys you, because you finally listened to what it was trying to say all along. The seduction of the shadow, why you're attracted to what you secretly hate. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that what repels us often also attracts us. That we are drawn sometimes magnetically to the very people, habits, and situations that we claim to despise. Why do we fall for someone who treats us poorly? Why do we return to environments that stunt our growth? Why do we keep choosing what we say we don't want? Carl Jung believed the answer lies in one of the most mysterious forces of the human psyche, the shadow. Not just the dark part of ourselves that we hide from others, but the part we hide from ourselves. And here's the twist: the shadow doesn't just haunt us, it seduces us. Jung understood something most people miss. The shadow is not just about darkness, it's about power. It contains everything we've disowned: our rage, our lust, our envy, our ambition, our hunger for control, for dominance, for chaos. But it also holds our creative fire, our instinct, our authenticity, our wildness, our truth. And if we repress it long enough, it doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows stronger. And then it finds another way to enter our lives: through projection. We begin to see outside of us what we refuse to acknowledge within us. That's why we're inexplicably drawn to people who embody the very traits we claim to loathe. That's why we're fascinated by villains, obsessed with toxic personalities, addicted to emotional volatility. Because some part of us is starving to integrate what we've denied. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Has someone ever triggered you so deeply that you couldn't stop thinking about them, even though you knew they were toxic? That wasn't just attraction. That was your shadow recognizing itself. Something in them activated something in you, a hidden part of your psyche trying to claw its way back into consciousness. And until you consciously face it, you'll keep being pulled toward it again and again, like a moth to a flame. Not because you're broken, but because your psyche is trying to become whole. This is what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We are not attracted to what destroys us because we want to suffer. We are drawn to it because it carries some missing piece of our own identity. That's the seduction. The person who dominates us might activate our own repressed desire for power. The addict we fall for might mirror our own compulsive tendencies. The chaos we keep returning to might reflect our own buried desire to break free from a rigid life. It's not the destruction we crave, it's the integration. But when we don't recognize the message, we get trapped in the form. We confuse the messenger with the medicine. And that's when we get hurt. This is why Jungian psychology is not about fixing yourself, it's about facing yourself. It's about looking at every person you've judged and asking, what part of me do they reflect? It's about noticing your patterns and asking, what am I unconsciously trying to experience through this pain? Because every addiction, every toxic attraction, every self-sabotaging behavior is a message from your unconscious. Come home, face what you've buried, integrate what you've cast out, and here's where it gets real. Most people never do this work. They spend their lives running from the shadow, blaming others, chasing highs, repeating patterns. They go from one relationship to the next, one job to the next, one identity to the next, never realizing they're being hunted by the parts of themselves they refuse to claim. You can spot these people. They're always in conflict, always in drama, always playing out the same emotional loops, but they don't see it. Because the shadow doesn't knock politely. It disguises itself as chemistry, as fate, as passion. But it's not love, it's a cry for wholeness. So what do? We turn toward the shadow. We stop demonizing it. We get curious. We journal our triggers. We explore our projections. We ask, what does this situation say about me? And slowly we reclaim the pieces of ourselves we thought were unacceptable. The anger we suppressed becomes healthy boundaries. The envy we hid becomes fuel for our ambition. The chaos we feared becomes creative freedom. And the more we integrate, the less we chase what hurts us because we no longer need an external mirror to show us what we've finally accepted within. Let me leave you with a question that might change everything. What if the people you can't stand are showing you the parts of yourself you secretly need to love? What if your greatest triggers are your greatest teachers? What if the seduction of the shadow is not a trap but an invitation? The archetype trap: how the roles you play keep you addicted to pain. We like to believe we are free, that we make our choices with awareness, that when we suffer, it's just bad luck, or someone else's fault, or an isolated mistake. But Carl Jung would challenge that belief at its core. He'd say, you are not free if you don't know what role you're playing. And most of us are playing roles we didn't choose, roles that were written for us long before we had the language to question them. These are the unconscious archetypes, the silent blueprints of identity that live beneath our personality, shaping the way we love, suffer, succeed, and self-destruct. And until we see them, we're not really living, we're acting. Acting out the same old story, with different costumes and different faces, but the same emotional script. Jung believed that archetypes are inherited patterns of behavior, primordial images and instincts that live in what he called the collective unconscious. They are ancient, universal, teero, the victim, the rebel, the caregiver, the orphan, the lover, the trickster. Each one carries its own script for how to think, feel, and behave. And here's the twist: we don't just adopt these archetypes, we become them. We absorb them through culture, family, trauma, and personal experience. And once we identify with an archetype, it becomes a kind of psychic costume we don't know we're wearing. But the costume doesn't just shape how others see us. It shapes how we see ourselves. And some of these archetypes are addicted to pain. Think about the martyr archetype, the one who sacrifices endlessly for others, always putting themselves last, secretly hoping that someone will finally notice their suffering and save them. Or the victim archetype, the one who finds comfort in helplessness because responsibility feels too terrifying. Or the savior, the one who needs to fix everyone else, not because it's noble but because it distracts them from their own brokenness. These roles can feel safe, familiar, even virtuous. But underneath, they're often fueled by unprocessed trauma, unmet needs, and a deep fear of confronting the truth. Let me ask you something that might sting. What role are you playing in your life right now? Not the one you post on social media, the one you live when no one's watching. Are you the one who always has it together? The strong one? The funny one? The responsible one? The misunderstood one? Be honest. Because whatever role you've unconsciously clung to, whatever archetype you've fused with, it's not just defining your personality, it's defining your pain. And until you see the role, you can't step out of it. And if you can't step out of it, you'll keep living the same emotional patterns, even when everything else changes. This is why people can leave toxic relationships and still find themselves in new ones that feel eerily similar. It's why someone can switch careers, move cities, change friends, and still feel trapped. Because the archetype hasn't changed. The inner story is still running, and the mind will seek out the circumstances that match the story. That's the trap. If you identify as the abandoned one, you'll unconsciously attract people who leave. If you see yourself as the unworthy one, you'll sabotage success or chase people who confirm your lack of value. And you'll call it fate. But it's not fate, it's a script. And it's one you have the power to rewrite. But rewriting that script means killing the role. Not with violence, but with awareness. You have to become the observer of your own mind. You have to question every identity you've inherited. You have to ask, who am I without this role? Who am I if I'm not the fixer, the victim, the achiever, the silent one? These questions are terrifying because the ego doesn't want to let go. It clings to the role like a lifeline. But Jung would remind us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were told to be, not who you needed to be to survive, but who you are underneath all of it. The truth is, most of us are not addicted to pain itself. We're addicted to the identity that pain has helped us maintain. The pain becomes a mirror that reflects the role we've come to believe is us, and that's why we return to it. Not because we want to suffer, but because without it we don't know who we are. Healing, then, is not just about feeling better. It's about breaking character. It's about walking off the stage you didn't know you were standing on. It's about choosing presence over performance. So I'll leave you with this. What part of your pain is tied to an identity you're afraid to let go of? And what might happen if you finally drop the mask you didn't know you were wearing? The alchemy of wholeness, transforming your inner chaos into conscious power. There is a moment in every deep inner journey where we realize something pivotal. We are not here to become perfect, we are here to become whole. And wholeness, as Carl Jung taught, is not the absence of chaos, pain, or contradiction. It is the integration of all that we are, the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, the sacred and the profane. What destroys us is not the darkness within us, but our refusal to face it. And what saves us is not the fantasy of purity, but the courage to contain our totality. This is the true alchemy of the soul, not turning lead into gold, but turning chaos into conscious power. We spend so much of our lives trying to control, suppress, or eliminate the parts of ourselves that we think don't belong. The anger that erupts in traffic, the envy that stings when a friend succeeds, the fear that paralyzes us in moments of decision. We try to fix them, hide them, purify ourselves of them. But Jung would say, that is not healing. That is fragmentation. Every time we reject a part of ourselves, we split. And every split weakens us. We become scattered, out of alignment. And then we wonder why we feel lost, anxious, drained. Why we can't find peace. But how can we be at peace when we are constantly at war with ourselves? The path forward is not elimination, it's integration. You don't need to kill your shadow. You need to know it. To understand its language. To see what it's been trying to tell you for years. Your anger is not your enemy, it's your boundary, begging to be honored. Your fear is not weakness, it's a signal, pointing to where you've abandoned yourself. Your jealousy isn't small-mindedness, it's a mirror, showing you what you've denied your own worthiness to claim. When you truly listen to these parts, they shift, they soften, they stop screaming because they've finally been heard. This is the alchemy. When you bring consciousness to what was unconscious, you transform it, not by force, but by relationship. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong unfolding of the self through integration of the unconscious. It is not a path for the faint of heart. It requires radical honesty, deep self-inquiry, the willingness to sit in the fire of your own discomfort without reaching for distraction. But the reward is immense, because when you stop rejecting yourself, you stop seeking external validation. You stop chasing relationships that reflect your wounds. You stop performing for approval. You begin to live from center, not from compensation. And here's the most beautiful part. As you integrate your own darkness, you become less afraid of others. You stop projecting your shadow onto the world. You stop needing to judge, to control, to fix. You develop compassion not as a performance, but as a byproduct of having faced your own suffering. You begin to see that everyone is carrying something they haven't yet understood. And rather than reacting, you respond. Rather than attacking, you ask. Rather than defending, you connect. This is the power of a whole person. Not someone who is flawless, but someone who is fully themselves. So let me ask you, what parts of yourself are you still running from? What emotions do you still label as bad? What stories have you told yourself about who you're allowed to be? If you want to stop craving what destroys you, you have to stop resisting what's already inside of you. You have to stop outsourcing your worth. You have to come home. And that home isn't a perfect version of you. It's the real one. The messy, complex, contradictory, beautiful you. Carl Jung didn't offer easy answers. He didn't promise peace without suffering. He offered depth. He invited us into the underworld not to punish us, but to return us to the surface with treasure. And that treasure is self-knowledge, self-ownership, self-integration. Once you hold that, nothing outside of you can destroy you, because you've stopped being a stranger to your own soul. You've taken back the parts of yourself you were once ashamed of, and you've woven them into your power. This is the end of the craving. Not because the world changes, but because you do. Because when you become whole, destruction no longer seduces you. You no longer need chaos to feel alive. You are life, and that is the beginning of true freedom.